So, we're here to talk about the life of Mother Marcelina Posada. How I got chosen to do this talk, I do not know. Well, I've always admired the courage of Mother Marcelina in holding together the small group of young women who had begun to form around Don Carlo Copini. They were left orphans after his death. I really don't know much about her or her life. What I know comes from stories of Donguanella that involve her, or stories of Blessed Clare Posada that involve her life. So, this is going to be a learning process for all of us. To prepare for this study, I've been using the same basic outline that I've used for Donguanella's life when I've taught that. This method is to look at the life of the saint or the figure in question, and to see how their life and their circumstances may be similar to ours, to apply it to ourselves. So, for example, Donguanella was born in the mountains of northern Italy, and he claims, and there's some evidence that he was right, that from their strong, solid forms and from the rough and tumble rivulets of water that flow from them, he himself is a strong person with a rough and tumble character. So then, looking at myself, I was born not far outside the city of Vancouver, and halfway up the foothill, that not far from mountains that when I was young were always snow-covered. That position, halfway here, halfway there, at least in my own opinion, gave me the ability to adapt to whatever environment I found myself in, whether in the big city of Rome or in the mountains of Coyhaique, Chile, or Switzerland. So, looking at your own story, what do you think your natural environment gave to you? Keep this question in mind as we continue. So this kind of back and forth between the life of Marcelina and our own lives, our own stories, this will be our MO for this time together. Although together may be stretching it a bit, since I'm half a world away and these lessons will have to be taped. Still, I do hope that somehow we'll get to know each other in this process, as well as getting to know Mother Marcelina. One warning, it will mean some homework for you. There will be things for you to look up, to think about, there will be questions to answer, and sometimes a page or two to write, or something to draw or design. But the juniors who have been my students can all attest that I never give homework that I myself don't do. So, if you care to share your homework with me, you can send it to me email, and I'll send you what I've done. I'll share my answers with you. And just to show you that I really have done my homework, at the end of our talk, I'll even start by sharing with you my first paper at the end of this today. So, if you're ready, we'll get started, and hopefully we'll all learn something useful, not just about Mother Marcelina Posada, but even about ourselves. So let's get started with our first talk about the life of Mother Marcelina. In these first talks, we'll look at the environment that Marcelina grew up in, the environment of Italy and Pianello, her national and local environment, and the environment of her family. For this first part, the question to keep in mind is, if you remember it from our introduction a little while ago, how does your national, local environment affect you? How does it impact us? So the environment of Pianello del Lario. Marcelina Posada was born in 1858, during the Second War of Independence of Italy. It was a difficult period that saw Napoleon III and Camillo Cavour working together to oust Austria from Italian territory. In fact, Donguanella was actually born in Austria. Okay, no, he was born in Italy, but it was under Austrian rule at the time. It was also as a result of the constant struggles to free Italian territories and then to unite them into one nation, a time of great poverty, as is any time of war. In Italy, in the Lombardy region especially, which is where Pianello is located, there was great tension between the state and the church. At this time, the Papal States were still a vast territory, whose head of state was the Pope, making his reign too often more temporal than spiritual. But the church holdings also cut Italy in half, and this made for difficulties between those trying to unite the whole peninsula and those church leaders who stood in the way. Pianello instead was along the path that led from northern Lombardy toward Switzerland. While the town itself didn't play much of a role in the unification process, its population was nevertheless affected by the difficulties caused by the national struggles. The political and social upheavals and the first waves of the Industrial Revolution brought misery to many. And although it's an area richer in agricultural land and therefore more ready to produce food for hungry families than, say, Freciso, still many sought what they hoped would be sure riches and fortune and ventured into Switzerland, France, Germany, and even as far away as the Americas. Marcellina's family had no need to emigrate, however, at least not at first. They were not rich, but they were far from destitute. In fact, theirs was a house others often knocked at to look for and always receive some food, lodging, or other help. This was the national and local environment that Marcellina grew up in, a nation just coming together, while many families were simply falling apart. It was not an easy time politically or socially, and these difficulties had their effect on the Bosada family. They would prove especially difficult and significant after the premature death of the head of the family. So think about the nation and the time that you grew up in. Look up some of the main events of that period for your nation and especially where available for your specific town. Which of those events might have had an influence on you and your family? If we were to have a class together, I would ask you to prepare and to present your answers at the beginning of the next class. But since we won't be meeting in person, as I stated earlier, if you wish to share your answers with me, you can send them to me email. Sister Rosalind will have my address. And I will respond by sharing my answers with you. So that's your homework for this reflection. We'll take a break and give you some time to look up the year of your birth and to start to jot down some important events that you feel might have had an influence on your local environment in general and you and your family specifically. We will come back later for the second topic, that is the environment of the Bosada family. In this second part, we'll look at the Bosada family and the relationships therein. And the question to keep in mind is this: how does your family impact you? If you notice, I keep the questions in the present tense because what affected us when we were growing up still has its effects on us today. So the environment of the Bosada family. Marcellina was born the 6th of 11 children, putting her in the exact middle of the family. Here's a picture of the Bosada family with Mama Rosa in the middle, surrounded by 10 of her 11 children. In this family picture, Papa Alessandro is absent also. Marcellina was about 11 when Dina, the last of the siblings, was born. There's a cute story about her asking her mom where this newest baby came from. Her mother replied that the angels had brought her, and Marcellina pouted, "Well, why didn't you let me see them?" When Marcellina was about 14, so Dina, who would become Sister Claire, was only 3, their father Alessandro died suddenly. This was a great trial for the family. Some of the older boys followed the example of many of the other families and left in search of more secure futures in the Americas. The oldest boy, Tranquillo, took over the management of the family silk factory, but he was unprepared and not as skillful a manager as his father, and so Mama Rosa had to go often to help him. This would have meant leaving the younger children unattended, except that Marcellina was ready and willing to help. She learned early to accept responsibilities and to take on the care of other members of the family. Mama Rosa, therefore, gave her the care of the 2 youngest girls, Seconda and Dina. One of Marcellina's greatest gifts was her ability to observe carefully and to understand intuitively the inclinations and capabilities of others. This ability shone through her care of both of her sisters. Secondo, she realized, was made for family life, and so she helped her grow in basic domestic skills. Dina, on the other hand, was more inclined to meditation and prayer, and Marcelina saw in her the makings of a religious. She consulted with her mother, who agreed to let Marcelina have her way with both. So, when Dina was old enough, Marcelina arranged to send her to the boarding school of the Canossian sisters in Gravedona, a town not too far from Pianello. The family could no longer afford, as they once would have been able to pay for Dina's schooling, so she was sent as a working student. That is, she helped with menial tasks in order to pay for her schooling. It also meant that she didn't get to eat with the wealthier students, but her timid temperament made this a perfect solution. In the meantime, Marcelina continued to help the family at home, but she also began to help out in the parish with the new young priest, Father Carlo Copini, who had come in July of 1862, the year after the death of Papa Alessandro. But we'll talk more about that relationship in another conference. For now, here's a photo of Father Copini. In Marcelina's family, her mom was one of the most influential members. She taught Marcelina a lot, not just about household chores and management, but about kindness, generosity, and about her faith. Of her siblings, Dina was the one with whom Marcelina shared the most, her dreams, her hopes, and eventually even her religious vocation. Not all of us were born in families that were so faith-oriented. Some of us may not know or have good relationships with one or more of our parents, our siblings, or other relatives. Still, it's important for us to realize that God put us in our family for a purpose. It's important that we realize this, and in His plan, even the most difficult relationships were meant to make us grow. It's up to us to pray, and that kind of prayer that's a real dialogue with the Lord, asking Him to reveal to us His purposes, and to grant us the grace to forgive and to ask pardon for what needs to be forgiven. And like that prayer says, to change what we can and to accept what we cannot. In your family, who was the most influential in your life and why? Was it a positive influence or less so? Take a few moments to talk together about your families. If in your instance you have difficulty sharing particular events, don't feel you need to that you have to. But eventually you will need to share them with someone who can help you work through them. So now we'll take a few minutes to speak together. Okay, so we'll conclude this time together, this first day, with your next homework assignment. This second piece of homework is to make yourself a family tree. Be creative. Noting especially those members who had the most influence on you. Write a page or two about those who influenced you the most and how. It's my hope that you'll all take time at the beginning of the next session to present your homework and to share with each other your family tree and some of your stories about those who influenced you the most. Again, if you wish to share them with me, you can do so and we'll have an exchange of emails. Now, I did say that I would share my first papers with you, where I answered these questions that I put to my juniors and now put to you. So, here they are. The first homework was to look up the year I was born and to see the events that may have had an influence on my family and me. And here's the paper I presented to my juniors. So, I was born in 1963, as you see, and there were at the time ongoing civil rights movements and protests, especially in the United States. Pope John the 23rd died and Pope Paul VI was elected in June. The world population was 3.2 billion, less than half of what it is in 2022. The Beatles broke into history, making their debut in the United Kingdom and Britain. On November 22nd, there was the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the first Catholic president of the United States. Now, I'm Canadian, but that had an effect on us. The Vietnam was ongoing at the time. Martin Luther King gave his famous speech, "I Have a Dream," in August. The first artificial heart was installed in the patient, and the first liver transplant was performed. And the Second Vatican Council had started under John the 23rd and was continued by Pope Paul VI. So, of these things, what kinds of things had impact on my life? The civil rights movements, even though it was mostly in the United States, still, it made our Canadian society more aware, watching them, more aware of our personal human dignity, no matter what the color of their skin. The election of Pope Paul VI and his continuation of the Second Vatican Council was important, especially with all the changes that it brought in the church. As an infant, I would have attended a Latin Mass, but of course I don't remember them. When I finally could remember a Mass, it was already in the new rite, in our own language. And the Vietnam War had its effects on Canada's role as a peacekeeping nation. A lot of the Americans seeking the draft dodgers came to Canada trying to get away from the war. So those are the things that had influence on my life the year that I was born. The second piece of homework was my family tree, and I'll get that up to you. Okay, so here's my family tree. I came from people who came from big families. My family, there was only 4 of us, but on my mom's side and my dad's side, there were 9. So in this, you see there's some symbols by some of the pictures of aunts and uncles. The 2 uncles on my mom's side that have the smiley faces were uncles who liked to tease a lot, and I got a lot of, from Grandpa Goche, who teased an extraordinary amount of time, and from these 2 uncles I learned a good sense of humor, at least a sense of humor. Maybe it's not good, but by Auntie Rosanna's picture, there's a camera, because she loved to take pictures. In fact, when she passed away, there were so many photos in the house, her children didn't quite know what to do with them. By Auntie Alma, there's a rosary, because she was a very prayerful and very religious aunt. Although she wasn't a religious in the sister kind of sense, but religious in her living out her faith. On my dad's side, there's a sack of gold by my Uncle Leo. On my dad's side, there was a lot more difficulties. We didn't know the family as well. My grandma LaRue, at a certain point, kicked Grandpa LaRue out of the family because he was drunk and had caused some trouble, so she made him leave, and then she had to raise her children by herself. Uncle Leo had schizophrenia, but it was a happy kind of schizophrenia. One day he decided that he had discovered a machine that would find gold anywhere, and our driveway was made of gravel, so he went and started digging up our driveway. My mom was having a fit, and he found 3 bags of gold. Well, it wasn't really gold, but in his mind it was. And he gave me one of those gold. Now, when I think about it, he thought it was gold, 3 bags of gold, and he gave me 1/3 of it. So for me, he was generous beyond all expectations and just a kind guy. He never married and ended up dying in his apartment by himself. I felt bad about that. And then there's the 4 of us. So my mom and my dad, and then I'm the oldest, then my sister, and then 2 brothers. The oldest of the 2 boys has passed away. He committed suicide, and that was a difficult time for our family. But the other 2 are still living. My dad, of course, has passed away also. He just died of old age and had Alzheimer's. Mom's still around, and so there's still the 4 of us. And we still have a pretty good relationship. I call my mom often, and every Saturday, most Saturdays, not every Saturday, my sister joins the call, and once in a while, my brother too. So this is my family, and if you care to share your family story with me, that would be great, and I'll see you tomorrow.